You may begin.
All right. My name is Pyro. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone out to the Writing and Parenting channel. As I'm sure we're all trying to find a good balance between family and writing, because kids can keep you busy. I'm going to turn everything over to introductions, and then once I introduce someone, they'll call on someone else to be introduced, and then we'll start off with questions from there. But if you go ahead, Michelle, if you'd like to introduce yourself, then call on the next person you'd like to introduce themselves.
Okay, I my oldest is 15, and I also have homeschooled them the whole time, so which I feel like earns me extra points for this particular panel because it means that they're around me all the time, or I'm otherwise in charge of getting them to places and everything. So balance has been hard, and while I've been writing longer than I've been parenting, my first publications were actually the same year that my first kid was born, before he could walk and need more things. Okay, Gray, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, all right. Well, yeah, my name's Gray. I am currently the father of one 6-year-old bundle of chaos who likes to run in here at every waking moment when I am trying to work on something. That's all I got that's relevant to this panel at the moment.
Steven, you're the last one.
Yeah, I can go. Okay, I have 3 kids. And my youngest is 5, and my middle one is 10, and my oldest is 14. I used to write when I was younger, and I kind of put it aside. I work as a architecture design, and in 2020, I went to working from home, stopped working in an office, and started working primarily from home. And at the same time, we had the 5-year-old as a baby at that time. So, and at that point, I decided I wanted to start writing, and then had to figure it out how to do that with 3 kids.
They do prefer keyboards.
All right. Well, the first subject that we have for the Writing and Parenting panel is boundaries and support network. Which one do you want to start with that as your topic?
I think boundaries would be a good one to start with.
Would you like to tell us some more?
Oh, right. Well, like, sorry, I've never done this before. When it comes to like boundaries, sometimes, a kid wants to do something and you might not be able to, or you might really want to get something done. And then, they don't really like, I guess they don't really get that sometimes. I don't know. It's
right. Well, when you have children, of course, they first completely depend on you. And I know when my kids were younger, I thought, oh, as they get older, they'll need me less. And that's been true for some of them. And then if some end up having special needs, or even just we're looking at this really cool club that my oldest can join, and it's going to have me out of the house more. So it doesn't really get less busy as they get older. And there's certain things you can't tell a kid, like, no, I'm not going to come help you. So you can set boundaries, but you also have to be willing to accept when things happen. So
yeah,
yeah,
I've struggled with the boundaries in my house for sure. Part of that is because, I'm basically the stay-at-home dad, so I do cater to all 3 of their needs all the time. And the part that I struggle with boundary in trying to get my own work done is trying to remain cognizant that I need to be calm, that they're not purposely trying to take me away from doing what I want to do or working on something. So it's the boundaries don't really exist except for just trying to make sure everybody's getting what, has their needs met, while also understanding that I can put my things aside and always come back to them.
Yes, and I both found it very hard to be interrupted, and that's when I started kind of figuring out that there might be some neurodivergence in our family, because it would honestly make me angry, even though intellectually I knew that they're young children and everything. So I actually found myself to be much happier if there can be a set aside time so that it's delineated. You're writing now, and then other times you're fully a parent, so that you're not always thinking about like, oh, that thing I got interrupted at. If I could only just go write even this one sentence that they interrupted me in the middle of.
Yeah, that does make sense. Especially like if they are a part of the writing process, like they might want to know what you're writing, like they want to know what you're doing. And admittedly, that becomes a slight problem for me because I do a lot of romance and like a lot of not safe for work stuff. So it's like she's like, "Hey, can you read that to me?" I'm like, "I'd really rather not."
No, usually my kids have asked me what I write sometimes, but usually they just want to know what's for lunch. And those are the kinds of things that you can set boundaries for and explain and have signs. Of course, 6 is a little bit young, not too young to start doing that, but a little young to get total compliance, to have a sign up or something like, I'm just going to be working for the next 30 minutes. Then I will come out and answer your questions.
Yeah, whenever I do recording for audiobooks, I have a little sign on the door and it says kind of like recording in progress. And for the most part, my daughter will see that sign and be like, "Oh, okay, I'll come back later." At least I have that. That's a slight boundary we've kind of set up, thankfully.
Yeah, and I think having those things are important because children do have to learn that they can't interrupt all the time. And since I had 3 children, they also they can play with each other. So they start to learn, well, what's a real need that I actually need to interrupt for? What's just me being bored or having a random question. So with that, I think what also becomes important is that's why your overall support network matters, because kids, that is a learning process for them. And of course, they're not doing it on purpose. So I remember when I first started writing, I read some very encouraging advice about how like becoming a parent doesn't stop you from being a writer. And it's nice to be encouraging and all. But then later, I realized that the writers who had posted about that had babysitters. So I think you have to be careful to compare your experience to someone else's and just realize like that the support network matters that much. I heard you laughing, Stephen.
Yeah,
It really does.
Yeah. I love getting advice from parents that are not parenting.
Well, I wouldn't say they're not parenting, but because they have a babysitter,
right,
they can set aside that writing time, and then they can go on an adventure with their kids this other time, which is the general advice for any kind of entrepreneurship or working for yourself, is to delineate when you're spending time for yourself or the family and when you're working. And kids make that difficult, so having a babysitter is the perfect solution. Just not always possible. So I think sometimes when we give advice too, we have to remember that that our own situations might be different than other people's. Because I don't remember them mentioning the babysitter in their very encouraging article about how you could still write after you have kids.
Yeah, they never do. Oh, you can still write. Oh, by the way, I have a babysitter for like 5 days out of the week.
Even find one, right? Or if sometimes if your babysitter is the grandparents, you might culturally assume that everybody has that. So for example, I have a very encouraging husband. He's very supportive, but he works long hours. And we have, if something on the house breaks, also, not just kids, sometimes you have things come up that you have to take care of first. And if he's gone long hours, I mean, somebody has to pick up the slack, whether it's cooking or fixing those things. And so that means even if he wants to, he can't be babysitting every minute that he's home either. All right, so let's move on to some of the more positive things, because you can teach your kids, to have. I know even some parents who don't write, they might have a quiet time after the kids stop napping. It's just, to try to teach them to have some independent time, and you can try to set things out for them. Sometimes they don't work because maybe your kid is special needs or an only child, or they manage to step on a nail and then they actually need you. But, if they work sometimes, then they can help you find time to write. But besides those challenges, then what has helped any of you adapt to those interruptions and to having to schedule around children?
For myself, I guess adapt. Basically, how do I get anything done? The number one thing I use to get things done in writing is the Notes app on my phone. Because I just always have it with me, and it's also one of those where social media and different things can just suck your time away. And it's so much easier for me to just click the Notes app and give myself that time back instead of wasting it somehow. But I just have it with me. So when I first started writing, I think I wrote my first book, probably 40% of it on my phone, because I was trying to put our youngest one to sleep every night.
It's actually pretty impressive.
So yeah, the whole time the way we ended up getting all of our kids to sleep was getting them a twin bed, and then laying down with them until they fell asleep and getting out of bed, and then eventually they all were comfortable doing that by themselves. But there's that 3 to 6 month period where they don't. You have to do that. So I would lay down and just have my phone out and would write. And then I have continued that to where I use that. I'm always taking them everywhere. Part of being the stay-at-home dad is I'm a chauffeur, so I always have the phone, so I can always open it, and then I always have ideas going. So it doesn't mean that I have to, like, I'm writing. Sometimes more so now, I'm not writing full chapters or passages or anything, but I'll have ideas, or I'll even have just lines of dialogue that I think of. So I just pull the Notes app and start writing. That is kind of one of the ways I've adapted. The other one is I have, for my work, I already have a few computers, a few laptops. So I always have my smallest laptop kind of thrown in the car. Especially if I'm waiting during soccer practice for one of them, or they're in cheer now and dance and tennis. So I always have one laptop in the car so I can do some writing, and that's not ideal because it's sometimes you can't just jump into your writing process just when you want to, and the car is not a great spot to do that, but you adapt. That's kind of the idea. So.
Yeah, I have definitely done that too. And I think the two most important things about that are most of the places that I can take my laptop don't have internet. I don't understand why, But, so I have to have everything loaded on and independent of internet that I want to work on. And then the second thing is to, of course, money can make things difficult, but as parents, we tend to put the kids' needs first. Make sure you have what you need to write. I was writing on the same old tablet for about a decade, and it worked well for a while. But we just replaced it, and I cry with the opportunity, with happiness at the opportunities that it's given me, where I might be staying up with a kid and they just want company. They don't want to be awake and alone. But I can write, and they're doing something, like they're doing art, or I can take it to their appointments. And I've tried writing by hand, and I can send myself notes on the phone, but try to get the tools that you need to write in your situation. And maybe remember to actually download or otherwise make available the stuff you're working on, because half the time I get there to these places in the car and I'm like, oh, that's right, no internet here.
Yeah, that I've had similar things where it's like I can't write on my phone because the thing I've been thinking about and writing so far is, I left it on something else. I think, and I think part of this adapting too is you can't be so hard on yourself if you don't get something done. You have to just be proud of whatever you get done in those short stints of time and say, you know what, yeah, that's okay. I only got, 500 words today, but it doesn't matter. I was able to do something, and for myself, a lot of times if I got nothing, still I'm usually thinking about it or thinking it through in my head somehow, and I'm progressing it some way. Maybe I'm not being productive yet, but you kind of always hope that production will come at some point.
Yeah, I do think that's important. It was a hard lesson for me to learn because I like to hyper focus, which is what was making it difficult to learn how to deal with my kids potentially interrupting. So what I would love to have is 90 minutes, right? Which is kind of laughable if you're a parent. But I did find that if I have to choose between 90 minutes, one day a week, or a couple of smaller sessions, that sometimes working more frequently has you thinking about your story enough to make decisions and not kind of forget your story exists, if that makes sense. It kind of gets if you're working on plot holes or anything, it helps with that. Now, for the actual drafting part, I would still rather have those 90 minutes. But for editing and for the other aspects, shorter and more frequent is better.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I'm not like I actually don't have the option to stay at home or even go down to part time. I'm literally working 40 to even sometimes 50 or 60 hours a week. Last year it was even harder because I was getting up at 2:30 a.m. So I actually ended up sleeping through a lot of my would-be writing time because of how exhausted I was. So adapting is kind of hard for me. It has gotten easier. That's why I now have a room specifically for computer stuff. And it kind of makes sense, like when you go there, like it's kind of like going from one job to the next. But you actually like this job. This job isn't for survival. This job is for fun. So just kind of creates some motivation. I guess that could be a form of adapting. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, one thing I admire about you, Gray, that I know from you is that you also do things like go to the gym. Because I feel like if I could look back I'm a little older than you, and if I could look back on the last decade and change one thing with a magic wand, it would still be difficult because I did have special needs kids that I was literally running around behind them all the time, making sure they didn't accidentally die. Yeah,
no dying, please.
Yeah, well, I've literally grabbed my kid from running into the road, even though I was calling his name. So that can be very taxing, but then when you do have time, you want to take care of your health. So it might have sounded like a roundabout way to get to that, but if you don't take care of your health and take care of yourself, then you'll be losing writing time later when you're making extra appointments for yourself, or you are sleeping instead of doing your writing because you're so exhausted because your health just isn't the best. So that is something to keep in mind too as a parent, because I feel like we don't always take care of ourselves because we put the children first.
I think that's a great point, because with my kids so spaced out from 14 to 5 years old, I've had, in all that time, and I used to be really active in sports, and all the time I've had kids, that has went just completely to zero. And I'd go to my doctor and they'd be like, well, why aren't you, you need to do this, and I'm like, yeah, that'd be great, but I don't have any time for any of this stuff. So trying to make that time for, just in general parenting help, it's very important. And just now that my 5-year-old and all 3 kids are now finally in school all day, I've been able to finally start going to a gym and doing some of that. It's like, but it's definitely something you need to, parents should prioritize, because you're just kind of under fire as a parent. Like, you just have so much you're doing, and then you're also, especially if your kids go out to school, they're gonna be bringing back so many colds, and like, even all of a sudden you get time and somebody's sick in your house. Or so definitely health is it's kind of a key factor in getting anything done.
Yeah, I think especially if you're a writer and a parent, though, because you maybe underestimate how much is going to matter later. So of course, kids interrupt sometimes, but I also do think that parenting is not just a negative for writing, and that they can inspire and even change the content of what you write. So for me, on a very simple level, I read a lot of books, especially to my first kid. After that, they kind of read books to each other, and I would get to listen in the car while we're all playing an audiobook. And I definitely read books in genres that I wouldn't normally read. So I read a lot of picture books to my first kid, and I did end up writing some picture books too. And something like that would have never happened if I wasn't around those books all the time.
Yeah, my kids having kids have changed how I write completely, and the content of it. It started out because I'd always wanted to write a book, and I'd been compiling ideas for stuff for a long time, but I never got serious about it. And then I found myself, I was playing toys with my kids, and I'd be playing, action figures with my son or something, and we'd get these stories going, and I would kind of start thinking, more and more, oh, maybe I should actually write or do something. And then that kind of kept morphing into different things. And like my son, I got my son into Star Wars, and when the new movies were coming out, we would kind of talk back and forth and guess what the stories might be, which also got me. So it's like my kids kept influencing kind of my ideas. That was kind of the baseline, but then just having them, like, the content, like, I also then I don't put much violence in any of my books, because I just didn't want to anymore. Having kids, like, I didn't want to go there, and I think it's fine if you do. It's just that's kind of the effect they had on me. But I also base characters on them and their personalities. My middle one is she the oldest one could kind of, now that I've written books, he can kind of care less, really, but which is sad. But my middle one's like so enthralled by it, and she helps me workshop ideas and go through stories and plot lines and all of that. Like, it's really fun. Matter of fact, I have she went as one of my characters for Halloween because she liked my book. Like they continually inspire like my writing, and sometimes I even think that I've put things in my books for them in the future, like just actual passages that I'm hoping one day they read and have a better insight into me. Because I mean, it's definitely that author insert, but it's not like inserting me, but for them. So they've had a huge impact on. I mean, I didn't even start writing until I had them, so that yeah, they inspire me all the time. I say that too, and I think 3 of my forwards of my books that I acknowledge them.
Yeah, I was definitely writing before I had kids. So that's part of the reason it felt more like an interruption, like this life I already had before them. But then I find that I have inspired them. They see me reading and writing, and one of them's a huge reader. And then my youngest, she is a huge artist. And when she was little, that's one of the reasons I decided to publish the self-publish some picture books, was because I could draw and paint beside her, and she found it fascinating. And then the subject matter had more to do with the special needs children. And so it just fit better in my life. And now I've always loved short stories, but I've also gone back to short stories because they're shorter and I can get them done more easily with how my life is now. So it kind of works both ways, where even if they don't inspire the content, they still influence what I write about, because I'm exposed to different things that I read, and because my time is different, and the ideas that we're all exposed to are different because I'm a parent. And then I see how I'm inspiring them to work hard, even if they don't choose to be writers. I think 2 of my kids would just about die if I asked them to write a book, but but they see how hard that we work. And then Gray, you were saying, of course, it also influences when you can write some more adult themes, because I've written some heavy themes too. And then my kid was about 11 or 12 at the time, my oldest, and he would come by, "What are you writing?" I'm like, "Well, it's too adult for you. Go away." And I tried to use speech to text, and I couldn't for that one.
Yeah, it's always fun when that happens.
Yeah, or I would be using speech to text, and then suddenly the text is talking about asking me when we can go to the park. I'm like, pretty sure that wasn't in my story.
It'd be a nice addition, though.
So, do you guys feel that being a parent's kind of changed like the content of what you write? Like, I know, like as Gray has touched on earlier, he's more careful what he reads around his kid. But do you feel like it's changed, like made you change genres, or do you feel like does it make you write a little more in detail? Like, have you learned to write or do things differently with having kids?
Yeah, like I have I've sort of tried to switch into more kid friendly, like young adult type stuff. Because used to I first began with like a dark fantasy, like really like gritty rough stuff, like like a lot of heavy stuff. And I still kind of do that a little bit, but just not as much. And just on the off chance that my daughter does want to know what I'm doing, I can at least tell her some of my projects, not all of them, but some.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke on that before, but even the projects that I'm even contemplating doing, my to-do list of projects that I foresee are all kind of shaped by by my kids. I mean, I really had no interest in YA until recently. And it's like, and then even this last thing I wrote, even I kind of took a break from my fantasy series just to jump in and do a YA perspective, first person point of view from a in writing it with the main character being a girl, because I'm just inspired by my two girls to have this idea that to have a main character and to write a book that way.
How about you,
All right.
Michelle?
We have a question from T. She asked what it was like when the kids were very little.
Okay, so like when Minnie Gray was like a baby and she wasn't really able to do anything like that, like see what I was doing. It was actually a little bit easier now, I mean, back then, because she did sleep a lot, and I'm pretty good at typing one-handed, so I could hold her and still like work at the same time while she was like napping in my arms, which, as adorable as that sounds, my arm went to sleep quite a few times. But it actually was easier. But now, like, she's 6, she's actually learning how to read. She reads pretty well. And there's actually been some instances, like when I am on particular scenes, I have to like shut the computer off. Hey, you want to go outside? And just kind of change the subject, because it's harder to work on certain areas of my work with her around now, because she doesn't understand the subject and the concepts, but she can actually read it. And the last thing I want is her to repeat that at school.
Yeah, I also had a kid who was hyperlexic. T is saying her kid could read pretty well at 3. So he could read, mine could read pretty well, but he also just needed to run off a lot of energy. So we did spend a lot of time outside, and that meant, of course, not being at the computer to write. So I would say for me, when they were young was the hardest. And I had the kind of child where usually the way it works when you hear funny parenting stories is they have the easy child first and then they get the hellion. And I got the other way around and still decided to have more kids. So you would not know now that he's 15. But at the time it was very difficult. It was like always being on call. And he was just a lot, and there was pretty much no writing. So that's one of the reasons why we want to be encouraging and positive, but I think it is also important to say that sometimes it is okay to take a break or to change up what you're doing and to realize that your situation is not the same as other people. Like, I found it easier to take a couple months long break and try to come back to it when I had figured some things out or he had matured some.
Sorry, I took so long in the shower. I was just playing.
Speaking of which,
Yeah.
We go to church now.
No, we're not going to church yet, honey. No, we got a whole hour left.
Okay.
Somehow that was perfect.
Yeah.
Pacific round helps all you put up the number line in class. Pacific round helps right there.
Well, I think I said a little bit about that before, but I do think it gets easier the older your kids get. They definitely entertain themselves a lot more, and you find yourself with more time. Although the time may change because you have to do things all of a sudden. Where afternoons I used to have time, those are all taken up with after school activities now. And now I find I have more time like in the mornings or between doing actual work that I get paid for, and during the day. Sometimes I found I get more time now, especially now that they're all in school. I don't know how you homeschool them as well, Michelle.
Well, I think generally when you're a parent, you are not you have children and you have an idea of what that's going to be like, but there are no guarantees. And that doesn't change just because you want to be a writer. And so a lot of it is just adjusting, where it might be like this for a couple of months and then it changes again. So the constantly changing was part of what was hard for me, to have to reevaluate every couple months. Okay, how do we do it now? So, but even just realizing that that was what was needed helped to kind of like reevaluate every couple months. Did that work? Did that not work? And also I learned how to set goals, and then what I would call super goals. So goals were things I could pretty much meet unless there was some kind of disaster, right? So in a normal month, I could meet this fairly easy goal. And then the super goal was more of the, do you know how when people plan things and they don't plan for anything to go wrong? That was the super goal. That was like, if everything goes right and I work really hard and nobody gets sick, this is my goal. So I would be really happy if I met my super goal, but not upset with myself if all I met was the more reasonable goal, because a lot of it's out of your control.
Oh, T, who's your question for?
I think it might be for me, since I said that my kids inspired some characters. One of my favorite characters, and the character that my daughter went for Halloween, was actually just kind of a side character, but it was totally based on my daughter, because she's my middle daughter's like incredibly smart and doesn't, always has the answer. She also uses some different phrases, so I started using those phrases, like she always says the word actually, because she's incredibly intelligent, but she'll correct anything you say that's not accurate. So she'll always say, actually, it means this. So I started using that. I was like, oh, I'm just going to use a lot of her in this character. And I started writing this character. And then that's my first book, and I have an audio book of that. And she listened to the audio book, and that was like her favorite character right away. And she didn't even know that was kind of based on her at the outset, but eventually she started picking up on it because I would use some of her phrases in it. And so that was my favorite. That character is, in the first book's name is Stasia. That was my favorite part of doing it. But I've used my kids for other characters, just kind of the way they are. Like my youngest one is a total empath, so I've kind of based characters on her. And my oldest was kind of born an old man, kind of. That's kind of how he's always acted, like older than he is. So I've used that kind of idea for a character as well.
See, I'm not sure if I've really totally based anything or anyone off of my daughter. The closest I could probably guess is like maybe I kind of base a bit of Karina Gontier off of my little one from my Tales of Defiance series I'm working on. Just not a whole lot, but just the way she acts, like she has a very strong sense of what's right, what's wrong. She's very like hard-headed. She knows what she wants. It's like, what, I could make something out of this. And just, I don't know, just that's all I got for that. Not a whole lot, but a little bit.
I would say I have not based characters off, but the way that it influences what I write about is that when you have children and you're watching them grow up, you kind of see things again that you've maybe forgotten that you had to learn. And when I work with my stories, the way I see them is thematic. Like, characters matter to me, but they matter to me as somebody working through this challenge. So the challenges are what have been influenced by my kids, where I'm like, oh, I forgot that people are not born knowing this or having decided this, and this is a theme. So if like if they're having issues with some of their friends, or the friends acting this way, and it's not as black and white as the friend is just being an awful person, but it's more like a personal conflict, or a conflict of this family believes this and this family believes this, or even conflicts like how technology is changing around us and how education has changed a lot. So those kinds of themes are in my work, and they're inspired sometimes by just seeing things again with new eyes as the kids learn them. So T has another question. I'm not sure if I understand it though.
I'm not entirely sure how to answer it either. Oh, okay. It's a statement. It's a statement. Okay.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I believe she's saying this. Tea berry, the item you've been working on, is gonna be given to your kids later. Oh, okay. I mean, do you guys plan to like give your works to any of your kids to look at later?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I wrote my picture books for. I knew that I
Yes,
didn't
you
have a
did.
lot of experience with picture books. You know, I still did the best that I could. I still ran them by people and got help. But I also felt like if I was traditionally publishing,
Are you streaming?
just mute,
I'm not saying. I'm sorry,
just
guys. I'm
mute.
sorry.
And
No,
she can't
I
talk.
want to talk.
Okay, how do I? Hang on, I'm looking.
Hi.
Hi.
But I also wanted to
I
write
found-
some of those stories then because they mattered to me then, if that makes sense. And because I did them when I felt like they were important to my kids, I was able to hand them to them right away. I don't know if that makes sense to what you were talking about, T. Berry. Just, you know, not only being inspired by our kids, but my picture books were um, about different social situations that young children have to learn how to handle. And maybe some kids are not that great at that unless you explicitly tell them how to handle it. So that's what those books were inspired by and what they were for. And I also took them to preschools. And I do remember some of the preschool teachers telling me this is exactly the kind of thing we need. So kids will definitely inspire. You'll see different needs than you would have without kids.
So, would you say that you guys being writers with kids have like been really helpful into inspiring their kids to be interested more in reading, writing, and trying to do their own thing?
Yeah, I would say I'm not sure if me being a writer has inspired her to do more reading, or if her doing more reading is inspiring me to write more. I'm not sure which one it is.
Daddy, I want to talk.
You inspired her to talk.
Exactly.
I think some of it you don't see right away, you know, but they do see you working hard. And they take in those life lessons, and it's good. Even just me walking around reading, I know inspired my kids, and my oldest is a huge reader.
Yeah, it's tough. I think, you know, when you have three of them, you realize that they're all so different no matter what you do. So, like my oldest, I don't think it matters to him. I mean, I think he appreciates it and he understands on a different level than the other two, but he's not as outgoingly artistic or expressive. And that's not necessarily how we connect. Although what's interesting is we will still connect on parts that make up writing, but not actually writing. Like when we watch movies, we'll talk about, we just inevitably have discussions about the story or the character arcs or what's going on. But he has no real interest, and he's not a big reader, and he has no interest in writing. But my middle child, she's artistic. She really likes drawing. She really likes likes to express herself. She writes. She's totally all in. She loves all of it, and she wants to read everything I'm writing, and she's writing her own stuff. And I know I know me having written things that it inspires her to do it, but I think she would have done it anyways. And then my youngest, she doesn't, she kind of didn't really get it necessarily. She just, I'd be writing but I'm also, I work from home and I draw a lot. I design houses. So I always have my computer open to design. I'm designing stuff. So sometimes one of the kids is more interested in that. But like with my youngest, I have a guitar. Sometimes I play guitar. She is way more interested when I play the guitar than my other two. So sometimes you don't know what inspires your kids that you're going to be working on, but could be writing. It really could be anything. I'm happy that at least one of them is inspired by it.
I mean, I can definitely testify to the fact that being a writer does not make your kids a writer. But like you said, it's not really something that if you pin too many hopes on that, you'll be disappointed, but if it does happen, you take the opportunity and I wouldn't discount what or what you've taught them, because you just kind of randomly know things that you can add, like the character arcs and just casual conversation. But I think even if none of your kids become writers, that they will see the work ethic, and they'll also see how you handle the life balance part, and that will be what's important to them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think as a parent too, you take any opportunity that in any lane you can to connect with your kids. You go there. So you take whatever and if they're interested in it, and if you know anything about it, then you try to connect with them in that way. Whatever it is. If it's writing, that's great, but it could be anything.
Well, I feel that we've covered everything at this point, so I guess the opportunity is there for
I had a question
questions and answers.
for Michelle and Gray. It was something I was just thinking of while we were discussing all this, but did having kids, has it changed what kind of writer you are? I was on the panel for pantsing and plotting, and I used to be much more of a pantsing type writer, and I still discovery write all the scenes, but for myself, that has changed so drastically. I mean, I used to write in college a lot, and I never outlined. I was never a plotter. I was like the furthest thing from it. But having kids, like I almost without having the time, I know I can work on the outline like a little bit, but even if I can't write a scene, so I've morphed into a plotter when I didn't really mean to.
So I would say yes and no, because I specifically to the plotter question, no, just because I realized very early on that I was a plotter, but I realized that I thought I was a pantser because I could keep it all in my head, because they were short stories. And then as I moved to novels, or like you said, have kids, and suddenly you have more to put in your head. So I like to joke with my kids sometimes that they can remember this trivia that they're telling me because they don't have to remember that we have an appointment at 3:30. So I think it does change. And also, of course, maybe getting older changes it too. You get very good at time management, or you quit being a writer.
I've always been kind of like just make it up as I go along. But I think after my little one came to be, I've been more like I kind of do try to plot. I try to like have a decent amount of like a plan. Sometimes a bit too much, because sometimes I'm planning too much, I don't actually do the writing part of being a writer.
Daddy, are you allowed to take this?
I mean, the other thing I do is because I can't. So sometimes I don't have that that extended chunk of time. So a lot of times I will bounce around my book, which is a big reason why I need an outline, because I can go and say, I wrote 2 paragraphs for chapter 3, and I'm going to go, and I don't have time to, like, I put that aside for so long, I don't know how to get back into that without rereading it, and but I have an idea for chapter 8, and I'm going to go write that tiny scene if I can, and then I'll put that away, and then like sometimes I definitely bounce around. Like that time management of writing a book while you have kids is tough, and that's one of the ways I've gotten around to of doing it, is being able to write the book out of order.
Well, that's one reason why I've switched back to short stories, because I found that so frustrating. I've always written out of order. That's fine. But if you get interrupted enough or have big stretches in between, you lose the thread, so to speak. And I'm sure I'll go back to novels later. I love short stories, so it wasn't exactly like pulling my arm. But I was just like, let me just work on some short stories. But I think you get better at time management, and you start forgetting what you were about to say, because I had something to say and now I don't remember. Send yourself a lot of notes so that you don't forget. Oh, I remember. Sorry. Sometimes if I'm just in a random conversation with some usually young person who doesn't have kids, and they're talking about how they can't find the motivation to write. And I'm like, motivation? All I need is some free time. So you kind of get past that. Generally get past that kind of like waiting for inspiration to start. Forget inspiration, man. I got notes and I just need some people to leave me alone for a few minutes.
Yeah, I think that's pretty universal to having kids, is you look back on before kids and think, what did I do with all of my time?
Well,
Well,
I do
it
have
makes
a
me hope
question.
that it just makes me hope that means as they get older or even move out, that you no longer have that problem, right? You'll just be like, now I have time.
So, having kids, can be a lovely thing and also be very frustrating as well. How do you guys deal with frustration when you're trying to get something done as much as you can, but you're just interrupted to the point that it's just you have to set things down to tend to your kids while also not trying to be frustrated with them as well, because again, they are kids and they have needs as well.
I don't know how to reword this. You give up. You go play with your kids and figure out what kind of system you need in place, or what, like I have a very calendar that I put everything on, including some mundane things. So I would look ahead and say, okay, I'm giving up right now to go do this with my kids. And that is fine because I'm a parent. When is the next time I can write? So being able to look forward, if you have any plans, if you're organized like that, can help a lot.
Yeah, I think it's cliche, but I would say just having patience is, if you have kids, you just have to have patience. And that goes to them. That goes to yourself though too. You just can't be hard on yourself if you didn't get something done. But that doesn't mean I'm perfect every time. There's certainly sometimes where, especially if I have to stop what I'm doing because my kids are fighting with each other, that one's the most frustrating. But I don't know. I think that's, parenting is not easy, and sometimes you have to stay up late to get something done after everybody's gone to sleep. Or sometimes, you just figure out those moments where, all right, I know I have time here. This works for me too. Working from home, sometimes I'm just like, okay, I have to get something done. I have a certain amount of drawings I've got to get done and out the door. I just have to do them. And sometimes it's like, okay, everybody out of the kitchen because I'm working, and I will make dinner while I'm working, but if you guys keep interrupting me, I can't also work and make it like you communicating with your kids is kind of a big deal of, telling them, setting those boundaries, but telling them what is going on and how they're interrupting it and what they can do, and kind of giving them back their freedom to say, yeah, okay, I get that you need to do something, but here's what I'm doing, and you can go do that something over here.
Well, and if they're older, like some of ours are, and you're communicating like that, if you have a calendar when or you have free time later in the day, if you can tell your kid, this is my work time, but we will be doing something together at this time in the future, and be specific and not just like, oh, later, but like, oh yeah, but tomorrow we're doing this together. Remember? Now go away. When they get old enough, not necessarily a 6-year-old, but like as they get old enough where they should be learning how to understand the future themselves and how to plan. If they don't need anything real and they're just kind of yapping at you, that's when you need to communicate.
Yeah, I've noticed the older they get, the less they want anything to do with you anyway. So.
Well, mine want to come and tell me about very nerdy things, and I'm like, I'm so glad that you understand this very advanced math concept, but I am cooking right now, or I'm writing, and you need to, like, let's set aside some time where you can come tell me this, even if it's 30 minutes from now. I find that does help a lot, because that's what boundaries is about, is to be able to communicate and say, like, this is the time, this isn't the time. And the younger they are, or the more important it is, like if they're fighting, it does make sense to just throw in the towel sometimes and be like, you know what? I'm trying to do both things at once, and I'm not doing either of them well. I'm not really getting words down, and I'm not parenting well. So for those times, I feel it helps when you can look forward and know when you will or probably will have time to write in the future. Apparently, we're making people listening laugh, which almost makes me wish that their microphones were not muted. So I think we have covered a lot, unless somebody else has any more questions.
Well, I think that covers about everything here what we went over. I do want to be curious about the next kind of what we're starting up here in the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, so we have one pretend question. She keeps asking us, joking, if fur babies count. And I will tell you, that is my pet peeve, is when people are talking about their animals like they're their kids. And I don't mean that you don't, well, let's even grant maybe you love your fur babies as much as your kids, but I cannot crate my kids, okay?
I mean, you can if you don't care about laws.
Right? Like, I can crate my dog while I'm gone, and he will be fine. He'll probably sleep. But I know you're joking, but it really, like, it's a joke, but it's something people also say when you say you're a parent, and people are like, oh, what about my fur babies? And like, well, when I see your fur babies needing 24/7 care, then we can talk. Now, I will say I have things like chickens and rabbits, and like I have learned that any animal that you own is an emergency waiting to happen. So the more of them you own, the more they become collectively like having at least one child. Because I came home and this chicken needed a sling made for it so it could stand up. It had hurt itself. So I spent 2 hours making a chicken sling instead of doing anything else. So, but you have to own many animals before they equal one child. So hopefully that answers your pretend question. They count, but you need like 10. I think at least 10 to equal one child. Then they can take turns having emergencies.
Yeah, about 10's fair.
She has kids too, she knows. But I just thought it was funny, and I do get that question for real sometimes, so it does bother me when I get the question for real. I'm like, no, it does not count the same. Oh. All right, so we talked about how parenting is chaotic, but you can set some boundaries and get through it. You can use different tactics, like either learning how to write in shorter spurts and kind of knowing when it's not working, when to throw in the towel, when to change things up, which is probably every couple months when they're younger. You kind of reevaluate every couple months. And really leaning into any kind of support you can get, because the best time to write is when they can't interrupt when you're somewhere else and somebody else is watching your kids. But that's not always feasible. So just as much as you can and reevaluating things every couple of months. And you really learn how to manage your time and how to send yourself notes or take notes wherever you're at. Don't you, Steven?
Definitely. The notes app's like so good. Otherwise, I would have like 20 notebooks full of junk.
Are you going to know what they're called?
All right. Well, I
Speaking of
guess
knowing when to give in the towel, throw in the towel, right, Gray?
Yeah, she's been in here for like half of this thing.
I want
She just wants to talk.
Okay, fine. Say something.
to talk. And she has a lot of stuff.
Oh no.
Rose, what's your
Guys,
favorite
I'm sorry.
story? What's your favorite picture book?
A Pinkalicious book.
Those are good books. Those are great books.
What's
I
a
like the-
Pinkalicious book?
A Pinkalicious book. Gray.
Yeah, Pinkalicious. Come on, Gray.
When Pinkalicious was on PBS Kids, remember her?
Yes, I remember that.
That's a book. For that who does books. My
Yes.
rabbit. Why are your teeth super yellow? Daddy's teeth are really yellow.
They are not.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. Imagine if you were trying to do text to speech to text right now.
Yep.
You see, this is what I
Yeah, I
do when
gave
I'm-
up the text to speech. Or speech to text.
All right, Rose, say bye.
Like that. That's
We're gonna
really
all say
bad.
bye.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you all.
that's it. That's it.
Bye.
I want to talk.
Thank you guys for so much for your time in this that was awesome. And thank you to our small little mascot.
Mhm.
Bye.
And, if
Thanks,
you
Blue.
guys are wrapped
Good
up
day.
here,
Thank
I
you.
will end this recording here.